Are your wheels falling apart? It might be time for a rebuild. Whether you're replacing a bent rim or a broken hub, or perhaps you're just looking to true your wheel, I'm going to show you the whole process from start to finish. So that means pulling the wheel off the bike, dismounting the tire, and then breaking the wheel all the way down to the hub. And then of course, lacing and truing. Alright, let's see what we can do. The first step of course is to pull the wheel off the bike. We'll do this by loosening the axle nut and sliding the axle out of the wheel. Then you'll need to wiggle the chain off the sprocket and pull the wheel straight back out of the swing arm. With the wheel off the bike, we'll need to release the air out of the tube by pulling the valve stem core out. After that, we'll loosen up the rim lock and push it in to relieve the pressure. Before wrenching on the tire at all, you'll want to pop the bead. You can do this by flipping the tire lever over so the spoon shape is facing up, and then push down so the tire goes into the center of the rim. You'll need to do this on both sides. By the way, I always like to start with the sprocket side down. That way if your tire lever slips, you don't bust your hand on the sprocket. And with the rotor facing up, it lessens the chance of it being bent. To start working the tire off the rim, you'll need to insert 2 tire levers a few inches apart, with the spoon facing down. Push each lever in until you feel it hook on the bead of the tire, then work one lever over and then the next. To remove one lever from the tire, ease up on the pressure a little bit and wiggle the lever out. You'll want to take about 2-inch bites out of the tire each time. Any more than that and you'll be struggling. You'll notice about 2 inches away from where you have the tire over the rim, there's going to be a little gap where you can insert the tire lever. Try to hit this gap each time. As you're working the tire over the rim, continually check to make sure the bead is down on both sides of the rim. This is the absolute key to making this task as easy as possible. Another thing to keep in mind if you're having trouble working the bead over is to push the rim lock all the way in, so that way it's not interfering with the tire. So just continue working your way around, 2-inch bites at a time. With one side of the tire over the rim, we're going to flip the wheel over and follow the same exact process of pulling the bead of the tire over the edge of the rim. Once you've got both sides of the tire over the rim, we're going to place the wheel on the ground with the rim lock facing down towards the ground. Then push the wheel down in the tire so that way you have a gap at the top between the rim and the tire. Start by pulling the wheel and the tire away from each other at the top where that gap is until you have the wheel about halfway out of the tire. Then pull straight upwards towards your face and the wheel will come out of the tire. We'll need to remove the rear sprocket and rotor since those will be in the way. We'll do this by loosening up the sprocket nuts with a wrench so that way we can get the bolts out with an impact or Allen wrench. The brake rotor bolts typically aren't as tight as the sprocket bolts, so you can get those with an impact and a wrench on the backside. One last thing you'll have to remove is the rim lock and rim band. This is so you can get access to the spoke nipples. Before you do any disassembly of the wheel, I would recommend taking a few pictures of the spoke pattern or making a little diagram so you know exactly how it goes back together. The first step towards tearing the wheel all the way down is to loosen up the spoke nipples with the spoke wrench. I will go a few turns on each spoke so that way we can finish it off with an impact from the backside. If the spoke is turning with the spoke nipple, you're going to have to use a pair of vice grips to hold the spoke. And just a word of warning, I'm going to be saying the word nipple a lot in this video, so you better get used to it. Once you've got all the spoke nipples loosened up, you can thread them out the rest of the way with a hex head on an impact or a drill. Now it's time to pull the spokes off of the hub. On this wheel, there are 2 different types of spokes, so as you're pulling them off, keep track of which one is which and where it goes. On most rear wheels, you're going to have 2 different lengths of spoke, and then on the front, they all should be the same across the board. Alright, the wheel's pretty much down to nothing at this point. To begin reassembly, you're going to want to organize your spokes. So if you have 2 different lengths of spokes, obviously separate them so that way assembly goes a little bit easier. One thing I want to mention here is the wear markings on the spokes, as you can see in the video. Keep these in mind as you're assembling the wheel. It'll give you some clues as to how the wheel was put together and how exactly the spoke was positioned. Obviously, this isn't really relevant if you're replacing the spokes. Okay, we are going to start by placing the rim with the numbers closest to the work surface, and then position the hub with the disc side facing down. Now we can begin lacing the wheel. We're going to start with the inside spokes first. These are the spoke holes closest to the center of the hub. On this particular bike, the longer spokes go on the inside and the shorter spokes go on the outside. As you're installing the outer spokes, make sure they're going on top of the inner spokes, not underneath. The video will give you a visual of how it should be. Before threading the spoke nipple onto the spoke, be sure to apply some anti-seize lubricant. This obviously will prevent the spoke from seizing onto the spoke nipple. Alright, now it's time to thread the spoke nipples onto the spokes. We're only going to get them started. We're not going to thread them on all the way quite yet. The spoke holes on the rim are angled different ways. So obviously you have holes that are angled down and holes that are angled up. We're going to be shooting for the holes that are angled up at this point. Then you have holes that are angled left and right. As you're lining up the spokes, you'll kind of see which ones go where. It's pretty obvious, but I thought I should just mention it anyways. Now with one side laced, I like to wiggle the wheel around a little bit just to get things settled and make sure there's nothing that's bound up. The process for the other side is going to be exactly the same. Start with the inner spokes, then the outer, and then begin threading the spoke nipples onto the spokes. As you work your way around to the last few spokes, it may start to get a little bit harder to line the spokes up with the hole. If that's the case, push the spoke back towards the hub a little bit, and then position the spoke so it lines up with the hole. Then you can thread the spoke nipple on, and as you tighten the spoke down, the spoke will just naturally find its place. Now with the wheel fully laced, we're going to thread the spoke nipples down onto the spoke till there's about a thread or two left that's still exposed. And obviously we want to do this in an even pattern. The pattern I use is I'll start at a hole on the rim, then tighten down the spoke next to that hole, skip 2 spokes, tighten, skip 2, tighten, all the way around till I came back to that hole, and then move to the next spoke over. Follow that same pattern, and once you've gone 3 times around the wheel, you will have hit every single spoke. Kind of confusing to explain, but you'll see exactly how it's done in the video. Using the pattern I just described, tighten down the spokes with a spoke wrench until you feel just a little resistance with the spoke nipple seating against the rim. It's really important the spokes get tightened down evenly. If you take your time here, the task of truing will be so much easier. To handle the task of lacing and truing, you are going to need a spoke wrench, of course. Here's the wrench I've been using. The nice thing about it is the tips are interchangeable, meaning you can use it on pretty much every make and model out there except for the really small bikes such as an XR50 or TTR50. It comes with an assortment of different size tips, and you can pick these up over on my website. I'll put the link below. The next step is to measure the wheel offset. This is measuring from the sprocket mounting surface to the edge of the rim. On this wheel, the spec is right at 2 inches. So I'll check it on one side and then turn it around 180 degrees and measure again. The measurement on this wheel was perfect, but if your spec is off, you're gonna have to loosen up the spokes and shift the rim around on the hub to get it where it needs to be. Finally, the time has come to true the wheel. Like I was saying earlier, if you did an even job of lacing, the truing process should be pretty straightforward. You can either true the wheel on a truing stand like I'm showing here, or with the wheel mounted on the bike. For right now, I'm going to show you the process of truing with the wheel on the stand, and then later on, I'll go through how you can do it with the wheel on the bike. We're going to start by working on the side-to-side movement in the wheel. As you can tell, there's a slight wobble in the wheel, so we're going to find the high spot and tighten or loosen the spokes accordingly to correct that. You want to pinpoint exactly where the high spot starts and ends, and then tighten the spokes coming from the opposite side of the hub give them about a quarter to half a turn each, and this will correct the high spot. The key here is patience. Don't give the spoke more than a half a turn, or else you'll just be fighting the wheel back and forth. It's always a good idea to flip the wheel around and work from the other side if you're having issues with correcting a high spot. If you have a pretty severe high spot, you'll have to loosen the spokes on the side of the high spot and then tighten the spokes on the opposite side. Next up, we are going to correct the up and down movement of the wheel. So locate the high spot and then go 180 degrees around the wheel to what will be the low spot. And then loosen up 6 to 8 spokes on the low spot. Go back to the high spot and tighten up 6 to 8 spokes. You don't want to go more than half a turn on each spoke. So in review, you are tightening on the high spot and loosening on the low spot. This will pull the rim at the high spot towards the hub, therefore evening out the wheel. Once again, this takes some patience. Try not to turn the spoke more than half a turn, or else you'll just be fighting the wheel back and forth. Once the up and down movement is corrected, you want to check the side to side again to make sure that's still straight. And then of course, check the hub offset, so measure from the sprocket mounting surface to the edge of the rim. I promised I'd show you how to true the wheel with it on the bike. So mount the wheel in the swing arm or the forks like you normally would, and then hold a marker in a stable position so that way you can mark the high spots as the wheel is spinning around. Then follow the same process I just walked you through for correcting the side to side movement. As far as the up and down movement goes, it's a little bit harder to hold the marker in a steady position, but it's still possible to mark the high spots. Once you've got the wheel as true as you can get it, we're going to do a final tightening on all the spokes. So we're going to follow the same tightening procedure I explained earlier. So find a hole on the rim, tighten the spoke next to it, skip 2, tighten, skip 2, tighten. That same process all the way around the wheel, and once you've gone 3 times around, you will have hit every single spoke. Obviously, the best way to go about this is to use a spoke torque wrench. Most people don't have them. I don't even have one myself. So I'm going to explain how you can get by without one. Basically, these spokes don't really require that much torque. The spec on this wheel is 35 inch-pounds or 3 foot-pounds, so not really a whole lot. I prefer to go by the sound test. As you hit the spoke with the spoke wrench, you want a ting out of it and not a dead sound. Here's a tight spoke, and here's a loose spoke. At this point, we're ready to install the sprocket and brake rotor. Be sure to use Loctite on these threads. If they come loose, it's not going to be good. You'll want to do a final hand tightening of all the mounting bolts, just to make sure they're snug. I know the last few clips showed the tire mounted on the wheel already. I kind of mixed up the clips there, but the rest of the video is going to be on mounting the tire and installing the wheel back on the bike. If you need a hand with that, just keep watching. To start off, I'll put baby powder in the tire and roll it around. This prevents the tire and tube from chafing against each other. After that, I'll insert the tube into the tire and add some pressure. This allows the tube to center itself within the tire. Remove the valve stem core from the tube, and then we'll have to lube the tire so we can begin mounting it onto the wheel. For lubricant, I use dish soap and water mixed together in a spray bottle. The first thing we'll want to line up is the valve stem on the tube with the hole on the rim. And make sure you're inserting the wheel rotor side first into the tire. It helps to put a nut on the valve stem of the tube to hold it in place as we're working the bead of the tire onto the rim. So work the bead over as far as you can by hand, and then we'll get the rest of it with the tire levers. Again, we're going to be working rotor side up, so that way the sprocket doesn't endanger your knuckles. Insert your tire lever with the spoon facing down, and as you're pulling the bead over, make sure you're not pinching the tube in there. And also, you'll want to be working with the levers towards each other, so that way one lever's holding the bead while the other is pulling the bead over the rim. Once you've got the bottom side of the tire onto the rim, we'll have to get the rim lock in place. So put a tire lever on either side of the rim lock, and once you've got the tire pulled over the rim lock, push the rim lock upwards into the tire, and that's all you'll need to do. Before starting on the second side of the tire, make sure your tube is pushed down all the way inside the tire. That way it's not in the way and prone to getting pinched by the tire levers. Before we get started, of course, we're going to have to lube this side of the tire. To use the bead buddy, insert 2 tire levers and pull the bead of the tire over the rim. The bottom part of the bead tool goes underneath the edge of the rim, and the top part goes over, hooking onto a spoke. I prefer to put the bead buddy a few spokes to the right of the rim lock, and then work the tire over the rim in a clockwise fashion. I found it easiest to work in about 2-inch sections at a time while alternating the tire levers. So as you're pulling the tire over the rim, take out the tire lever that's behind and move it about 2 inches past the tire lever you just used, and follow the same pattern all the way around. Towards the end of it, I would switch to about 1-inch bites at a time. The most important thing to remember here is to keep the bead of the tire down in the middle of the rim. This will give you the room necessary to pull the rest of the tire over the rim. Also, only insert the tire lever far enough to where it grabs the edge of the rim. If you go any farther than that, you're risking pinching the tube. Just work your way around and take your time. This is where most people pinch their tubes, so exercise some patience here. And just remember, keep the bead of the tire down in the rim. This will help you a lot. One last thing to consider when you're pulling the tire over the rim with the lever, try not to go all the way down with the lever. Just go to the point where the tire is going over the rim. If you're going all the way down, again, you're risking pinching the tube. As you near the end, it's going to be tough to insert and remove the tire levers. So what you want to do is relieve the tension on the lever you're working with in order to insert the next lever. It's kind of hard to explain, but you can see what I'm doing in the video. Once you've got the tire mounted, reinstall your valve stem core and add air until the bead seats on both sides. Many times you'll hear a pop when the bead seats onto the rim. Then set your pressure. 12 to 14 psi is recommended for full-size bikes. Personally, I go with 13 in the back and 14 in the front. It's a great idea to check your pressure a few hours later to make sure the tube is still holding air. And of course, don't forget to reinstall your rim lock nut and valve stem cap. Now is a good time to wipe down the axle holes on the swing arm. Over time, dirt and grease will build up here, and it's hard to get to when you're washing the bike. When reinstalling your wheel, the first thing to line up is your brake rotor and brake pads. Then pop your chain back on and apply some fresh grease to the axle before sliding it through. Before tightening your axle nut, put a rag between the chain and sprockets and turn the wheel backwards. This will bring the wheel all the way forward to the axle blocks, and that's where you want it. Then tighten the axle nut to the correct spec. On this particular bike, it's 94 foot-pounds. That wasn't so bad, was it? Just make sure you check those spokes after the first couple rides, because they are going to loosen up quite a bit. And then from then on out, I would be checking it every 3 to 4 rides to keep them in tip-top shape. Thank you so much for checking out the video, and take care.